Today we've got speaker Rich Ham. Dr. Ham is the Associate Director of the Masters of Science in Operations Management and the Engineering Management at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Ham retired from the United States Air Force and the Department of Homeland Security, where he held various regional and national leadership roles. He is a recognized subject matter expert in Homeland Security issues, consulting domestically and internationally to the United States government. Dr. Ham teaches courses in leadership, global competition, homeland security, and unmanned aircraft systems, also known as drones, and is involved in the UAS research at the university. So, Dr. Ham, thank you much for joining us today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thanks, Karen. So I always am excited to, and probably my biggest challenge today will be to keep this short, but we certainly would have time for questions afterwards to talk to you some about what the Homeland Security Certificate in our program is about. First off, a couple of things to just talk about when people ask. Often we're asked, why does an operations manager need to have these skills? And really, it's grown. It was growing before September 11th, but it has become one of the skills that nearly every operations manager has to know, and many will be surprised to know. And one of the trends in industry that would, I think, interesting to note is 20 years ago, up to the mid-90s, typically the chief security officer, that individual would be at what we would probably talk about as senior director level, down several levels. In virtually every Fortune 100 company now, those are vice president and executive vice president levels. They're C-suite individuals. And they have more and more had to have skills to where they understand how to put together security requirements to make decisions and recommend decisions within the C-suite and to the board, but also so that they had learned how to be operations managers. Many of these individuals originally came up as law enforcement individuals, typically out of the federal government. And now some of them had to come back and retool to learn the very things that we teach in our program, how to do net present value, to make decisions on investment, how to make recommendations based on ROI. And I always leave this with a quote of one of my good friends that's typically a guest speaker. And when we asked him, what was the number one challenge that you had to adjust coming out of he came out of law enforcement, and he said, well, the number one thing I had to learn was that my company was not in the security business. My company was in the profit business. And so I had to do things as an operations manager to show profitability. So here's the kind of skills that you do learn in our certificate. You develop those competencies that you can follow both industry and government. We have many government officials and officers in the military or military members generally, and others that come because they want to add to their skill set on how to make better decision making, how to manage people, and understand what the compliance standards were. You can apply those skills to interdisciplinary problems, very wide problems, everything from making a decision of whether or not it makes sense to make a cybersecurity decision, because you often, even if you're not a cybersecurity expert, you are required to manage the cybersecurity operation and physical security operation for your plant or for a government facility, and manage those skills. In some cases, you could manage thousands of people that are dispersed across the world, which many companies and also government officials in Homeland Security do. You apply the critical thinking and those problem-solving skills to basically look at problems that have never existed before. And so every day I have colleagues telling me about, hey, look at, what do you think about this? And how would you approach it? We've never seen it before. It's a brand new problem. And we have to meet both the mission and vision of our company or our organization at the same time, meet these compliance issues, which sometimes conflict. So it requires a lot of critical thinking and long-term holistic views of how businesses and institutions operate. And then we go through case studies in several of these, and we basically teach real-world skills. let me show a couple of things that I think are kind of important to understand. And I'm not going to go through a definition page of all the acronyms because of all of the, I've been involved in many lines of business in aviation and the military, and everyone has their own set of acronyms. But I will just point to specifically for supply chain. CTPAT is very specific, and the things that an organization is required to do, it literally will bring their supply chain to a halt if they don't know how to do that. Export control requirements, what you can send and what you can't, and what those requirements are. We teach those requirements in some courses where you have to understand, when I send this out, am I violating any laws? Because there's certain countries that I can't send it to for certain technology. Hazmat controls, both in shipping and also in control and reporting. That has become a major factor, this kind of things that you have to do. If you're in a chemical facility, the CFATs, which is basically an infrastructure protection program in DHS, you are inspected to make sure you're meeting those regulatory requirements. And so you, as an operations manager, you may not do that personally, but you certainly need to understand your people that are doing that, and then what makes sense. The HR side of this is, what things do you need to understand if you are actually sponsoring people to come in on a visa? If you're traveling, what you need to know, what's the reporting requirements? Carl mentioned earlier, people we often have people come out of the banking industry. I have 3 recently that have taken the Homeland course. Those individuals there's very specific reporting that has to happen within a bank about the amount of money that's transferred, where it's transferred to, if you hit certain thresholds. Those all came out of one of the various acts since some predated 9/11, but some since then. So we start, and there's some things that people right off the bat, the Aviation Transportation Security Act, that was the first act after September 11th, but then the Homeland Security Act, which stood up the Department of Homeland shortly afterwards. FEMA is a Homeland, actually part of Homeland Security, and we teach those National Incident Management System concepts throughout the Homeland course, and a new course in crisis management, where you learn how do you set up systems and make plans to respond. And you can imagine there's a lot of interest recently because of the COVID response. There's some people wondering, did we really think this through? Because some of our responses, we wish we would have spent a little bit more time doing that, exercising it, and making sure it was right. And then operations managers making decisions to mitigate those. And then the Patriot Act, which is probably the most controversial of those, but there's still remnants that exist, and you have to know how to comply with that. If you are to receive certain types of subpoenas, how would that work? And while you've got an attorney, hopefully in large organization, you also need to understand even at what point you need to ask the questions and whether there's a compliance requirement. This is not all-inclusive, but it is at least a start in the kind of compliance requirement that industry, and in some case the government, has in order to meet the mandates after September 11th. In some cases, they were continuation of those exact kind of a copy and then kind of put on steroids after September 11th. But the point is, it is a pretty daunting task, and trying to figure out and self-study on your own with some kind of guidance is pretty tough to do. So we've done the courses specifically to give the skill sets. You know how to manage a workforce in these situations. You know how to comply. You would understand what are the things that I need to track. Are there things I should be paying attention to? How does my physical security of my building match with industry standards, and how does that and my cybersecurity match? And even some discussions, if you choose to take the UAS course, some discussions about counter-drone and how do you prevent espionage and that sort of information loss in that case. So here are the courses and currently, and what we'll say the top 3 courses are currently the required courses, but we have submitted a change and anticipate it going through this year and you could apply to only take 5003 and 5993 and then choose 2 electives. And the reason for that is we're always making adjustments, both the certificates and the course, based on what changes there are. So one of the body of knowledge in the American Society for Industrial Security had sort of de-emphasized the amount of supply chain. We know that several of our folks are in supply chain and they will take that so they understand the foundations of supply chain so that they can apply the Homeland Security skill sets to those and look at optimizing how their current operation works while they're trying to comply with Homeland Security laws and regulations. But we also know that there's some movement there of others that are going to be looking at things like human factors, a new course that we have that's in the final approval process this fall, 8-week 2, which talks about how do you investigate when something's occurring, how do you see what the human impact on, whether they made mistakes or it's a technology issue or the interface between humans and technology. And then the new course that we have, a 577V, that is in the approval process. It'll be offered 8-week 2 in crisis management and resilient design. And in that specific case, it's going to talk about, it talks about not just the government, but also industry best practices, the kind of things that you would be expected to do as an operations manager to ensure that you could react, like the COVID crisis would be one. Others would be if you had a terrorist attack or an active shooter, or just things about if you had a crisis that occurred because you've got a problem that's going on with the reporting, or because somebody was suspicious, or because you felt like that some of the individuals that you maybe if you sponsored somebody and you're wondering what you're required to do, what's the plan, how do you write a plan, what are the requirements for a plan, and then how do you exercise those and make sure that you're doing them effectively. So those that are interested, the advisor can help walk you through these kind of issues, but we have, I would say, a mixture of individuals that will would choose to want to emphasize more of what, for instance, the cybersecurity course. That course talks about, it's not that you're a cybersecurity coding hacker expert, but that you manage that using the FAIR technique or following the NIST standards, which is the National Institute for Standards. That is how we would look at making sure that you're meeting those requirements and managing the risk. Can't eliminate it, but then learn methods to manage that risk to make decisions.